I think probably the biggest challenge is engaging with organizations who will actually take these young people, because to them it's frightening, it's scary, it upsets their normal way of working, and you've got to work very hard to just explain to them how it's going to work, how it will enhance their organization, which it does, there's no doubt about that, but it's that first fear from the other people that just is the most difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah, and how have you sort of dealt with it? How have you sensitized people working at these organizations to expand these employment networks?
It takes time to sort of build up that trust, and first of all, you send people in with the young people, so they can work with them. So you make sure it works for everybody concerned. You continually talk to the people. So if there are any issues, you sort them out quickly and don't just let them sort of fester around. So communication is absolutely the key to it working.
Thanks.
Well, we put together around 35 little businesses across our trust as part of the college network, so that students can actually go from craft workshops into sole trader companies on site. So 30 sole trader businesses across the Ruskin Mill Trust provide the first step of work experience. And the good stories from those businesses then go out into the community. And what we find is that those good stories that are happening inside the organization allow more businesses to accept students to actually do work experience placements. So it's a massive job of actually cultivating the community to be non-discriminatory. And there's a lot of hard work there. But you've got to do it by performing it.
Yes, exactly. Thanks.
So this was just the first one that came to mind as a challenge. So it might not be the biggest, but the first one that came to mind. And I can only speak for working with adults and in the UK. So it sounds like from a previous presentation that it might be different here, but it's supporting staff in balancing the need between what somebody wants and what they need. And supporting them in because it becomes very easy, and quite rightly, the law also supports it, that you can't make an adult do something unless they're going to cause harm, obviously. So therefore, getting somebody to come and sit down at the dinner table and having a meal and practicing and maintaining those social skills, if they say, no, I don't want to do that, becomes difficult, especially if they say, no, I don't want to do that every day, and it carries on, so that becomes a pattern. And my question always is, well, does the person not want to come and sit down because they haven't got the skills to come and sit down, or is it really a choice between not wanting to come and sit down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we found, but that is in adult social care in England.
Yeah, and I think similar things might apply to selection of employment programs as well, right? Like, so for example, you talked about baking and gardening, but do we have enough options so that people who have different interests and different skill levels can sort of like hone into specific things that they are good at, that they might want.
And do you have the staff who can apply the right level of enthusiasm to what they're doing, so that they can get the young people and the adults enthused to do it themselves as well?
Yeah.
Because if you're working with somebody who loves what they're doing and who are enthusiastic, it's almost impossible not to get interested in it.
Absolutely, yeah.
No?
Related to that, one of the things was, I think, Ajit, you talked about well-being. And this morning, Mary talked about how we evaluate outcomes and what is a good life and how that is different. So I was wondering, we're talking about things like education, jobs, self-sufficiency, contributing to the society. How is that helping the people we want to help? And do you have some kind of evaluations in terms of any kinds of well-being measures of the people for whom these programs are being set up for?
I think it's something that we have just started looking into. As I mentioned, our focus has entirely been on providing the services. And I guess we have failed in looking at ultimately, at the end of the day, what is happening with their lives? How happy are they? How satisfied are they? What are the feelings that they have within them that they are yet to communicate, or that, something that we have probably overlooked? And most of the measures that are there for well-being is through quality of life scales and satisfaction scales. But then when it comes to something specifically on well-being, there are a few, like the general adult well-being questionnaire, but nothing, at least to my knowledge, specifically for this population. So it's basically interacting with them, getting to know, like the small effort that we did, getting them to speak about what they feel about their life. And as I said, it was an astonishment to the parents as well. They never knew, they never realized that there were these things that were going on inside their head.
Yeah.
If there are other scales that are available there.
Yeah, I mean, we, across all of our 7 programs, we have measures for all of them. But we use them very much as an opportunity to track and celebrate progress, and also informs what strategies that we can employ. So although there's a huge amount of data, a bit like Centre for Discovery, we are swimming in data and are getting better at using it. That's not actually what drives it. It helps us inform our practice, and actually sometimes some of the qualitative feedback that sort of measure the outcomes. So the letter from Peter's mum actually is a real recognition of the progress and success. Now that's not data, that's not everything else, but actually that's very, very real, and we mustn't forget that it's quantitative as well as qualitative data.
10 years ago, we commissioned an independent statistical company to come in and do an assessment on the financial impact for the local authorities, British government, when they sponsor a student at Ruskin Mill who's there for more than 8 years. Well, we found an interesting statistic, which is that if the progress they'd been making continued, and that is obviously hypothetical, but there was no reason to assume that it wasn't because it was consistent, then the British government saved about £1 million from the other course of action. And we went down to our local members of parliament, and they were uninterested in it, because their 4-5-year financial planning doesn't take into consideration a 30-year plan. So it was very, very disappointing. But what we could show was that the outcomes from the 8 years in Ruskin Mill had a massive impact financially for central government, but they weren't interested.
It's so interesting to think about measures of well-being, and in my agency, we've worked really hard to try to figure out what's going on internally with people. But there are no good measures, objective measures of well-being. But I have to agree with Mike in that the quality of data is huge, and it's the reports from parents, and it's how much are kids smiling and enjoying their day. And yes, sure, stress, if we can keep stress down, that's helpful. But I think it's part where the clinical judgment comes in. We want to make sure our kids are having fun. They're enjoying going to school. If they're resistant to go to school, then there's a problem at school, and we have to figure that out. So there's little things you can watch for, but it's so tricky to put those into numbers, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. Jenny, you also talked about measuring stress alongside evaluation of interventions, particularly ABA. I was wondering, is that assessment done online? Is it done using wearable tech? What is sort of the scalability potential of that for a large-scale setting where there are where we need to evaluate multiple people at the same time and sort of, provide intervention real time in real life settings?
Yes, and that is absolutely our goal, to be able to scale up this technology. And I think the whole goal of setting up our lab school was to do it on a small scale basis. And it was kind of like our test lab, can we do this? Does this make sense? We still really, really struggle with scalability. And as I was mentioning to several people before, it's a matter of getting the technology readily accessible and available. And that's one part, because each of those devices that we use, about $12 $1,200, and that's not going to be achievable for parents to get. But we would love to get these devices in the hands of parents. But we also need to consider, too, the factor of interpretation. So it's not just that we have this wonderful flow of physiological data. We need to have some expertise in being able to interpret it. And so to some extent, in current research that's done by visual inspection, there's some artifacting that can be done automatically, but you still have to have a human eyeball look over the data and make sure that everything makes sense, or we're not excluding an outlier or including an outlier by accident. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done. We're in the process of looking at those things. We're, again, working with folks from Georgia Tech to be able to apply some filters to our data so we can kind of scrub it out. With physiological data and with stress in particular, there's good stress. You want to be stressed out. You need stress to be able to address the concerns in your day and to function properly, but you need to be able to come back down. And what we're finding is that every student comes in with a slightly different baseline, so there's like kind of a pattern we have to learn first. And there's nothing in the literature that describes that, because I think we're really the first people who are doing it. So it's really like trial by error. And what we're also finding is that there are a lot of psychotropic medications that have blunting effects on our physiological responses. So now we have to take into account if somebody's taking like a beta blocker to reduce stress, or any number of other medications that could have anticholinergic effects, for example. Those will change the signal as well. So at this point, we're not ready to unleash a bunch of sensors out into the world. I do think it's possible. It's just going to take a lot more work and observation. I think it's doable. I also think one of the things that we learned is that when we're doing this kind of groundwork in situ, in the classroom, kids are running around, we're trying to make sense of the data. It's ugly. It's horribly ugly data, and we have to make some concessions. So while we're not necessarily measuring electrodermal peaks per second, we're looking for the general increase and what were the things going on there too. So we're using some of that clinical judgment again. So it's still a very individual specific science and an individual specific kind of procedure that we're working through, but we've been able to use it to some good clinical benefits. So we hope to continue our work. What I didn't mention in the talk was that we found that 60% of the time there was an anticipatory stress increase prior to a problem behavior. And the other thing that we found that was really clinically relevant is that 45% of kids did not go back to baseline for an extended period of time after they had a problem behavior. And that has a lot of important clinical ramifications. So we're just parsing through all these patterns that are emerging, and we are trying to do some subtyping, but it's just going to take more work. But that is our goal.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's really interesting. And you talked about sort of like there being limited literature on some of these things that we need. So a general question to all of you is, having worked and learned through real-life experiences, what do you think should guide our research agenda going forward? We talked about biological risk factors, environmental risk factors, toxins, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, a lot of the focus on autism has been on biological risk factors.
Mm-hmm. And what should guide our research questions is what's happening in real life situations, and that is it. I started my career as a residential associate, working in a group home with 10 adults with severe autism, and I got an education there. And to this day, the best hypotheses, the best research questions, the best problems that we need to have practical solutions for will come by looking at what's actually happening on the ground. I think that's really important.
Would you like to contribute?
I'd share that. We just started our own research board at Priors Court with the whole purpose of any research that we do has to impact the practice that we have with our young people. So it's not theoretical, it's all about practical application.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, we have a strapline called research-based action, action-based research. So the two are kind of symbiotic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's changed our culture by undertaking putting our practice and subjecting it to our research team in Ruskin Mill Trust.
Thanks. Ajit, would you like to add?
I would say qualitative research in real life situations. Actually, what are they going through?
Maybe we can go through the audience questions. If there's anyone else who has questions, maybe you can give in slips to the volunteers. The first question is for Angus. What can be the behavioral modification for sensory distracted behaviors for moderate to severely affected children?
What was the first?
What can be the behavior modification for sensory distracted behaviors for moderate to severely affected children?
So I think you saw that the engagement of the hands in every case, no matter how tentative the first start is, does a de-escalation process. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how breathing is regulated by the activity of handmade processes. And we have a curriculum where high levels of anxiety and volatility can be very well self-soothed through felt making. Now, felt making is a very simple process of taking wool from the sheep's back. Students may not all do that. And actually rhythmically rotating soap warm water between a cloth with the soft wool. And the hands of those children start to connect. And the kind of neurology of the hand that's been given by Dr. Frank Wilson, who is an evoluting biologist, neurobiologist from Berkeley University, we use as part of our kind of action research. So he describes that the hands actually built the brain. And he's recommending that in education we spend much more time actually connecting to the real world with our hands. So by finding the right entry point, the high arousal students, when they start to have the right entry point, soft, warm water, soap and wool, and do you know what they're going to make? They're going to make a pair of slippers that they're going to fit onto their feet. So they get bodily kind of consciousness. So by bringing the hands into the feet and their perception and their rhythm and their breathing regulation done through craft work, that's actually how we do our curriculum.
Thanks. The next question is also for you. Do you have short courses, workshops for young adults with autism? I think you talked about a training program for professionals, from what I understood. Do you have any training programs for adults with autism?
No, is the answer. Not short programs. Because the ultimate goal is a relationship between the student and the master. And that student-master relationship is indelibly connected to the trust that's afforded between the student and the craftsperson. So that's built over time. So our model is relationship-based, and it's about trust and the movements that actually ignite the kind of choreography of trust in the eyes and the feelings of the adult autistic situation. So the answer is no, but we do train mothers. We have a festival, a neurodiversity festival at Ruskin Mill next summer, and we have an international workshop, which is taken up by people from around the world for 1 week, where we train teachers, parents, on a 4-day course, intensively called Pedagogical Potential of Craft. That's the best I can offer you at the moment.
The next question is for Jenny. Can you please explain if the wristbands for EDA can be used by parents? My son struggles with stress-related OCD and behaviors. I believe that sometimes that causes stress. So it will give us more power in helping our kids.
That's a really good question. The devices that we use in the lab, we use the Q sensors, which came out of the MIT Media Lab, and we also use the E4s put out by Empatica. Those are commercially available. They're just extraordinarily expensive, which is something that we take personally. We were working with another group, Numitra, several years ago, who had a wristband. It was also pretty pricey, but we had the chance to pilot it in a program where we were having the children wearing it and also the parents wearing it, so they could monitor their stress reactions to each other, and we found that to be extremely helpful. But again, these devices suffer from the challenges of being able to scale up and manufacturing of a tiny specialized unit and doing it in enough volume and having the support for the software and the firmware and things like that. So it is available. If somebody has the money for it, they can certainly purchase it. There are guides to the information that these devices put out. I would just put out a word of caution about interpretation, because again, we have a whole team of people who are looking back at the data and making sure that we're artifacting it appropriately. And some of these devices have that built in, but they're not perfect. So you don't want to be drawing the wrong conclusion from the data because you trust it completely and implicitly. But it is commercially available, so they can certainly explore.
Yeah, and I think the second question is also about providing the data to teachers. I think that answers the question as well.
Yeah, and it's such a need. People keep asking us about that. And the previous devices we were using, Numitra, the Numa Watch, was fabulous because it did give us real-time information. In fact, it would send an alert and notification to a smartphone or an iPod that was within Bluetooth distance, although that also presented its own challenge because you had to make sure that device was always within Bluetooth range of that student. If they walked around the corner or went outside, then you would lose the connection. We dealt with a lot of connectivity issues, but in some of the instances we were able to use it, we did get alerts as the kids' stresses were going up, and we were able to go in and prompt deep breathing or going out for a walk instead of starting the lesson right away. So there was some clinical benefit there too, but we just need good manufacturers to get these devices made and readily available at an affordable price point, and I think they'll be very valuable.
Yeah, thanks. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay. Mike, you talked about a kit for the Beyond Bakery setup, if anybody else was interested in setting up a bakery-based program. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, what that entails.
Yes, I mean, the whole purpose of the project was to set it up in a way that you could scale it, you could replicate it elsewhere. So we are very close to being able to offer a complete package, which is the training program for the young people, so a detailed curriculum, a detailed teaching schemes of all the modules that they will go through to setting up the bakeries, specifications of equipment that might be needed, all the various sort of operating manuals that might be needed, sort of health and safety manuals. So the way that we're virtually there with that, because we wanted to make it as easy as possible for the next person to want to do it, because we've had to go through learning all this, so let's reinvent the wheel yet again. So it is, and we are actually talking with one other charity in the north part of England to be the first sort of pilot of that scheme. So it's added another level of complication to it, but it's sort of stuff we were going to do anyway, but we just made sure that we've documented it properly and made it happen. So yes, it is available for the India Autism Centre. You can have a Bread and Beyond bakery on site.
Yeah.
Just let me know.
That's fantastic. And I was also wondering, the scale of IAC and similar residential facilities also allow for development of sustainable employment opportunities that can then feed back into the township itself. So to develop a sense of community where the same people who are getting employed are building things or building products or services are the ones who are using those services, and it enhances sort of the sense of community. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean our bakery is right in the middle of our campus, so we smell baking bread every day. That's great because it's easy for the young people to reach to. But we mustn't forget that the ultimate aim is to get jobs outside as well. So we need to go out into the community. So it's probably a combination of the two. So get some organized, get some activities and operations inside the campus, but also make sure you've got operations outside as well.
Yeah, we have a social enterprise culture as part of the transition for our students. It actually brings in £1 million a year, which is quite a considerable amount of money. That's turnover. And that contact with the local community is exemplified in that turnover. And the good factor of the community back into our organization is really part of the education process that we provide for the community, really, because they learn about the skill set of young people by coming in and buying coffees, cakes, bread. I have to say we also have bakeries, but not as professional as the ones that I saw there, so I'm envious. And also art and shops, and our vegetable box systems are really successful too. So the key is to have a very disciplined, graduated process from the classroom into the workshop, into internal employment opportunities, external employment opportunities, and then businesses in the community, literally running cafes. It's interesting, the public do not mind if their cup of tea is slightly splashed in the saucer if they know that they are actually serving the bigger picture of community integration.
Earlier, one of you mentioned that I think one of the challenges is we have enough programs to train parents, to train caregivers, but the challenge comes when we're training the community, the neighbor, the community around us, the staff. So what have been some of the successes of going about the staff training so we can, facilitate sensitization of the community?
With the staff training?
Yes.
And the community?
Yeah.
So the staff training centre that we have, so we've been so privileged that we've been able to set up a property just for staff training. So we have trainings there both for the staff who come in and are trained as the students, I explained, but we also run trainings for the public there so that they come in as well, and the students help look after the students are there doing work as well at that time, helping out with the catering and looking after the grounds. So within the training facilities, there's also this an interface with the local community, a meaningful interface with the local community.
And do you have documented staff training programs?
Yes. Yes, we run several documented and some accredited training programs for staff, and which are also open to external.
Yeah, I think that'll be of great use.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Jen, you want to add?
The masters that we run is one of the transformational elements that our trust took a risk in embarking on with Lillehammer University in Norway. And I wasn't completely clear what the impact was, but not only did we expand within a couple of years, actually, of putting this master's together, but if I observe the confidence in which problem solving went through the roof of willingness to actually really sit down and look at some critical issues. It was as if a slumbering atmosphere within many of the middle management suddenly woke up and said, no, I want to be a leader. And they had the skill set and the agility in their thinking and in the cross-referencing of knowledge in this whole area. And I can only say to any organization, if you want to take a risk investing in your staff. And actually, it's not a risk, because the value comes back 7 times over, is my estimation. Okay, and also bring the public into those projects as well. Encourage them to join in too, and work with other organizations, because you actually then share practice in your research as you go through the research master's questions.
Would anybody else like to add something? I think I'd like to just end with one last question. What has been your greatest learning having worked with people on the spectrum?
I'll go last.
I think it's been a long weekend.
Yeah, it has.
I think we're all tired and dying to go back to the hotel.
I think it's the learning is what these young people or what these autistic people give to you. The learning that they live lives that are from a different perspective, and that's just a great thing to learn as a human being, that we should be more tolerant and we should be more inclusive. And working around and with autistic people really brings that home every single day. So that's what's hit me the hardest.
Well, I consider them to be my teachers, as I said earlier on. And all my assumptions about right, wrong, up, down, left, right, political views were changed. And what I've truly learned is that actually I have to step into their space. So I have to leave myself behind and actually be open and listen. And the skill of listening to the silence sometimes is really where we make internal changes. It's a spiritual space when you can listen in silence to that kind of slightly anxious and yet agile mind that's behind that remarkable mask.
I don't know if it's my biggest learning, but I think how something changed from me when I stopped using the word independence and called it interdependence instead. And that's not just for the people that I'm working with, but it's for all of us. So what can other people do for me, and what can I do for them in
Absolutely.
return is something. And it's not just it's from working with people. So let's not differentiate between
Yeah.
autistic spectrum or people, just working with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
I think the biggest thing for me, because I did not plan on a career in autism, it planned on me, apparently, but it was not my plan. And I got that first job in that group home literally because I wasn't qualified to do anything else, because I had a bachelor's in psychology at the time. But the second that I started working, those first few days, I was like, these are the most human people I have ever met in my life. They are authentic, they are loving, they're not trying to fool you. There's no artifice. They are just purely wonderful, enlightened. They're perfect in their own way. And everything that they do is just an attempt to communicate and get a need met. And I just fell in love with that. Like, how can you not? So then it becomes extremely easy to extend yourself to help that person. And then to feel this amazing love back and connection that is so pure. When you make that connection with a child and they're responding to you, it is the best feeling in the whole wide world. And you can't walk out of your job without a massive smile on your face and an absolute desire and will to come back and do it again and again and again, no matter how hard it is, no matter the tantrums, no matter the aggression or the difficult days that you have, it's that love that keeps you going, and it's amazing.
I think that's a perfect note to end this last session on. Thank you, all of you, and thank you all for your
Thank you, Dr. Megha Sharda, for chairing the last session of the conference. It must have been a difficult time for her, but then
That's
she...
it. End of the conference, but I think it's a beginning. After 3 days of so much knowledge, so much data, so much that we've all heard, I don't know about anyone else, but I now want to get focused. I want to take back a few things. Just a few things back home. But before I tell you what really I intend taking back home, I want to first thank you. Thank you. Each one of you. It's a very I don't get the right word, but I really feel thanked. When we started this vision, we had no clue that we would get these people. Tremendous. The best. And now, you have taken the trouble, you come, you'll continue to come, we'll continue to visit you. Thank you. Once again. Heartfelt. I take back friendship from this conference. We made friends. Some friendships apparently now feels closer. With some, we could spend less time, but we take it back. In this friendship that we take back, that we have forged and established over the last 3 days, will always be there. To me, it's a lifetime commitment. We'll be friends, and we'll together do whatever we can. Last year's conference changed a lot at ISC. It made a lot of impact, especially on what we had, the architecture, we were obsessed with an institutional setup because we thought that would work best, and now we completely changed from that to a community. This year, the vision strengthens, but stays absolutely intact on a community. I am summing up IAC for myself and for all of you in 3 words. IAC is for excellence. Whatever we do, it will have excellence. 2, IAC is not for profit. And 3, IAC is for perpetuity, forever. So whatever we build, whatever we create, should be fantastic, best of its kind. IAC will never be for profit, and IAC will be forever. That's what I'm going back with. And leave you to take back your keywords, because that's what matters to me. I go back with my keywords, 2, 3, 1, 9, whatever. We shall meet every year, same times. Next year, I think it's going to be 8th, 9th, 10th, because that's like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Because we need you all. We need you all desperately. And we shall continue to need you all every year, each year. And we shall meet again. Thank you.